300 soldiers watched it happen. Major Conrad Hale grabbed her wrist in front of all of them, twisted until something in her arm gave way with a sound that crossed the entire training field. And she did not make a single noise. Not a gasp, not a word. She just looked at him with those pale eyes and said quietly, with a calm that was more terrifying than any scream could have been, "This demonstration is concluded." He didn't stop. That was his first mistake. It would not be his last. Subscribe right now and stay with me until the very last word. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The formation had been standing in the August heat for 40 minutes when Major Conrad Hale's eyes found her. 300 personnel. Joint Assembly, Camp Pendleton. Infantry soldiers, logistics staff, medical officers, and the contingent from the Naval Cyber Operations Unit temporarily attached for a cross-branch exercise. The horseshoe formation was loose and hot, and the kind of quiet that comes from people who have been standing in the sun long enough, the conversation has stopped being worth the effort. Zara Quinn stood at the left edge of the formation in parade rest. She was 22 years old. Long, dark brown hair worn loose past her shoulders, the way she always wore it in the field because regulation buns gave her headaches during 16-hour shifts, and she had stopped caring about that particular rule 3 deployments ago. White sports bra visible where her uniform shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. Camouflage pants bloused into boots that caught light. She was the smallest person visible in any direction, and Hale's eyes, scanning the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been doing this for years, found her within 30 seconds of starting to look. She noticed him find her. She did not react to being found. She logged it, filed it, continued standing at parade rest with her weight balanced and her eyes forward. Hale had been demonstrating for 20 minutes. Combatives, joint locks, compliance techniques. His voice was built for this kind of performance. A command cadence that turned instruction into theater. Each pause calculated for maximum effect. Each punchline landing on cue. Because the 2 lieutenants behind him, Voss and Crane, had learned that laughing at the right moments was a form of professional survival. "You," Hale said. He pointed a thick finger directly at her. A sound moved through the formation. Not loud. The specific collective exhale of 300 people who see something coming and cannot stop it. "Chief, front and center." She walked to the center of the horseshoe. Her steps were economical and exact. She stopped before Hale and stood at ease and looked at him with the quality of someone conducting an assessment rather than experiencing a moment. "What's your designation, Chief?" His eyes moved over her uniform, the way a man moves his eyes when he wants the person watching to understand that the movement is deliberate. 17 Charlie, sir. Cyber operations." "Cyber." He turned toward the formation. The grin spread slowly. "So you fight the enemy from a keyboard. Is that right?" "My duties are technical, sir." "Technical." He said the word the way people say words they find distasteful. He began circling her. "Out here, things get physical. Let's see how your technical skills translate." From the second row of the formation, Master Chief Raymond Okafor watched Major Hale begin his circle and felt the specific thing he had felt in 3 decades of service whenever rank prepared to be used as a weapon. He did not move. Not yet. He watched with the stillness of a man who understood that some situations required patience before they required intervention. Hale explained the technique to the formation with the patient condescension of a man who believed he was educating someone beneath his comprehension level. Standing armbar, leverage over strength, elbow joint mechanics. He narrated while Zara stood perfectly still, hands visible, expression neutral, pale eyes taking in the 3 camera poles positioned around the training field. She had assessed those cameras on her walk to the center. Northwestern pole, best angle, clearest lighting, optimal timestamp visibility. She had positioned herself so that camera had a direct, unobstructed line of sight to her face and to Hale's hands. She had done this automatically, the way she did most things, without announcing it, without anyone watching being aware it was happening. Hale grabbed her left wrist. The grip was too tight from the first contact. Not instructional tight. Something else. She registered the excess pressure immediately and filed it under a category she had been quietly building since the moment he pointed at her. Evidence. Now, Hale narrated to the formation, his voice carrying easily. The subject may be non-compliant. Your goal is to apply pressure to the elbow joint until compliance is achieved. He increased the pressure. In the second row, Okafor's jaw tightened. At the edge of the field, Lieutenant Commander Priscilla Yates, who had been assigned to this unit as a JAG observer for an unrelated administrative matter, lowered her clipboard. Hale increased the pressure again. "Major," Zara said. Her voice was clear and steady and carried across the field without effort. "This demonstration is concluded." She said it the way a person states a fact that has already been decided. Not a request, not a protest. A statement. Hale's face changed, not dramatically. A small shift that Okafor caught, and that Yates caught, and that several of the senior NCOs in the front row caught. The thing behind his eyes went from performing instructor to something older and more specific. He had expected flinching. He had expected the lip tremble, the eyes going uncertain, the moment the target became small and manageable. What he got instead was stillness. Complete, professional, absolute stillness. It infuriated him in the particular way that powerlessness infuriates people who have never before had to experience it. He gave her arm one final wrenching twist. The sound crossed the training field. It was not bone. It was the sound of connective tissue failing under pressure it was never designed to withstand. A thick, wet pop that hit the air, and then hit 300 people simultaneously. The formation did not exhale. It went completely silent, in the way that things go silent when something wrong has crossed a threshold into something that cannot be explained away or laughed off. Zara's body went rigid for exactly 2 seconds. The pain traveled from elbow to shoulder to jaw in a white electric wave that she processed, categorized, and set aside. Her eyes did not close. Her expression did not crumple. She absorbed the impact with the specific control of someone who had been trained to separate what was happening to her body from what her mind needed to continue doing. She looked at Hale. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who has finally, after 30 seconds of escalation, produced the physical result he was working toward, and who is only now, in the specific silence surrounding him, beginning to understand that the room has not responded the way rooms usually respond. "See," he said to the formation, his voice recovering its instruction cadence. "Proper application of force achieves compliance. Subject is now compliant." Nobody laughed. Not even Voss. Not even Crane. Zara cradled her left arm against her body. She looked at it once. Then she looked at Hale with the same expression she had worn since the moment he pointed at her. Analytical. Unhurried. The expression of someone who has received a piece of information and is now deciding what to do with it. She turned and walked toward the base medical facility. Her path cut a straight line through the silent crowd, which parted without being asked. Her pace did not waver. Her shoulders did not drop. She walked the way she always walked, as if the direction she was going was the only direction that existed, and everything between her and it was simply terrain to cover. She did not look back at Hale. She did not need to. Behind her, 300 people stood in the specific silence of individuals who have just witnessed something they will not be able to stop thinking about for a long time. Hale tried once more to recover the room. He turned back to the formation with a comment about realistic training parameters. The comment died somewhere between his mouth and the ears it was aimed at. Okafor watched Hale's face, and then watched the formation's face, and understood, with the clarity of 30 years of reading rooms, that what had just happened was not a training incident. It was the first day of a reckoning that Hale did not know was coming. He took out his phone. He did not call anyone in Hale's chain of command. He called a man he had served with in Ramadi, who now worked in the JAG office at the Pentagon, a man who owed him a professional conversation and who would know, without being told to, what kind of conversation this needed to be. The medical facility was cool and quiet, and smelled like antiseptic. Lieutenant Commander Dr. Sarah Trent examined Zara's arm with the careful hands of someone who understood that what she was documenting would matter beyond this room. "Chief," she said, keeping her voice level in the way of someone controlling anger through professional habit. "This is a significant injury. Partial MCL tear, possibly complete. Severe bruising. Inflammation consistent with trauma well beyond normal demonstration parameters." She looked up from the arm to Zara's face. "How did this happen?" "Training demonstration, ma'am. Training Area 3. Approximately 1430 hours." Trent's eyebrows rose. "I've been treating training injuries for 11 years, Chief. I've never seen a demonstration produce damage at this level." She paused. "This looks like assault." "I need you to document it, ma'am," Zara said. Her voice had shifted very slightly. Not emotional. Intent. The quality of a person communicating something with precision rather than feeling. As detailed as possible. Time of incident. Location. My statement that the force used was, in my assessment, excessive for demonstration context. Please note the specific mechanism of injury and the range of motion loss. Trent looked at her for a moment. She was beginning to understand that the woman across from her was not in shock. She was building something. "I'll document everything," Trent said. "I'm also filing an unsafe act report. This goes up the chain." "That would be appropriate, ma'am. Thank you." Trent took photographs from 8 angles. She measured the swelling. She documented range of motion, pain response, joint instability. She wrote in the precise clinical language that would survive any proceeding, medical or legal, that this documentation was ever required to survive. Zara accepted the sling, the prescription, and the medical profile. She folded each document and placed it in her cargo pocket, as if she were storing components she would need for a project that was still in its early stages. She walked from the medical facility to the signals intelligence facility, submitted to biometric entry, sat down at her terminal, and opened a new encrypted file. She typed with one hand, the other rested in its sling. Her eyes did not reflect pain or anger or triumph. They reflected the particular focused quality of someone beginning a task they had been trained to complete under conditions that would stop most people from completing it. She accessed the base security network, navigated to the Training Area 3 archives. Timestamp 1430. 3 camera feeds appeared. She selected the northwestern pole, the one she had positioned herself for. She watched the incident at full speed, and then frame by frame. She identified the precise moment Hale's pressure transitioned from instructional to assaultive. She noted the timestamp. She noted the angle. She created a cryptographic hash of the video file to establish chain of custody. She saved everything to a server with access logs. Then she opened a second window and began searching. She was looking for a pattern. She found it in 4 hours. 4 women, 4 bases, 4 complaints, 4 closures that ranged from administratively buried to simply, quietly erased. Her face did not change while she read through the files. She read them the way she read all data, completely and without editorializing, extracting the relevant information and building the architecture of what it meant. When she was done, she opened an encrypted messaging application. She composed a single message. Her name, her rank, her base, what Hale had done to her arm, what she had found in the system, what she was building, what she was asking. She sent it to 4 people she had never met. She closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the hum of the servers. It was 2100 hours. She had been at her terminal for 13 consecutive hours. Her arm was a steady, persistent throb she had been managing as background information since 1430. She stood, rolled her shoulders, and walked back to her quarters through the cool California night. In the morning, 4 responses were waiting. The first read, "I'm scared, but yes." The second read, "I walked away from everything because of him. I'm not walking away from this." The third read, "I thought I was the only one. Whatever you need." The fourth read, "Count me in. Anything." Zara read each message twice. Then she typed back 4 words that were the same to each of them. "You are not alone." She closed the laptop, picked up the medical report from her cargo pocket, and unfolded it one more time. Read the clinical language, refolded it, set it down. She opened the encrypted case file she had started the previous afternoon and added a single line at the top. Foundation established. Building continues. She did not know yet that somewhere in the base records, in a service file classified above the access level of everyone currently at Camp Pendleton except 2 people, there was a notation that would change the entire architecture of what was coming. A notation that connected her not just to Hale's victims, but to Hale himself in a way that neither of them knew. She did not know yet that the man she was methodically building a case against had a nephew, and that his nephew was alive because of her. The case file had 43 pages by the end of the second day. Zara had not slept more than 3 hours. She did not experience this as deprivation because she had trained herself over 4 years of operational shifts that ran 19 and 22 hours without breaks to treat sleep the way she treated food, something the body required on a schedule that could be compressed when the work demanded it. The work demanded it now. She had the 4 responses from the 4 women. She had the medical documentation. She had the video file with its cryptographic hash and its verified chain of custody sitting on a secured server that logged every access attempt. What she did not yet have was the 3rd data point, and she understood with the methodical patience of someone who had spent years finding patterns in noise that Hale was going to provide it, without being asked. Men like Hale always provided the 3rd data point. She went to the dining facility at 1200 hours on the 4th day and sat alone with a tray she did not particularly want, because eating at regular intervals was a discipline she maintained regardless of appetite. She was on her 2nd bite when she heard the boots, the specific rhythm of 3 men changing direction. She did not look up. "Well," Hale's voice carried across the dining facility with the casual authority of someone who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged in it. "Look who we have here, the keyboard warrior. How's the arm, Chief?" The dining facility, which had been running at normal lunch volume, began to go quiet in the concentric rings that spread outward from a source of tension, the way sound spreads from a dropped object. Table by table, conversation by conversation. Zara took a slow, deliberate bite of her food. Hale leaned over her table. His shadow fell across her tray. Voss and Crane flanked him with the positioning of people who had learned to occupy space in relation to someone else's authority rather than their own. "I heard you went to medical," Hale continued. "Wrote up a little report, filed some paperwork." He paused for the effect he expected. "In the real Navy, Chief, we deal with problems face to face. We don't hide behind documentation." She took another bite, did not look at him. The dining facility was almost completely silent now. 41 people trying not to be obvious about paying attention, and failing. "That's insubordination," Voss said, stepping forward with the specific eagerness of someone performing for his superior. "You should show the Major some respect." Zara lifted her eyes then. She looked past Hale, past Voss, past Crane. She looked at the room with the particular quality of someone conducting a quick inventory, counting faces, registering ranks, noting the security camera near the serving line, noting Lieutenant Commander Yates sitting 3 tables away with a coffee she had stopped drinking. Then her gaze came back to Hale. She picked up her tray and stood. "This conversation is non-productive, sir," she said, and began to walk toward the tray return. Hale stepped into her path. His face had the color of a man who had arrived expecting submission and received indifference, which was, in his specific psychology, something considerably worse than defiance. "We are not done, Chief," he said, and his voice had dropped from performance into something private and specific. "I filed my own report about your attitude, about how you disrupted my training. By the time I'm finished, that sling is going to be the least of your concerns." It was a direct threat. It was a public admission of retaliation. It was delivered in front of 41 witnesses and a security camera that was currently recording at 1080p. Zara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stepped around him, deposited her tray, and walked out of the dining facility without looking back. Behind her, Hale was left standing in the center of a room that was utterly silent, holding a confrontation that no one else had been participating in. She was back at her terminal within 20 minutes. She added 3 lines to the case file. Incident 2, dining facility, 41 witnesses, security camera coverage confirmed. Verbal threat delivered explicitly. Admission of retaliatory counter report. She saved the document. She did not send it. She was still waiting. That evening, a text arrived from a number she did not recognize. 8 words. "Meet me behind the operations building at 1830. No signature. She read it once, set the phone face down on her desk, and sat for a moment in the hum of the server room, thinking about nothing in particular, which was what she did when she was actually thinking about several things simultaneously. She opened the base security grid. 3 weeks ago, she had recommended and personally supervised a facility's security upgrade. New thermal imaging cameras, 2 of them, installed at specific locations she had identified in her assessment report as coverage gaps. One camera was now mounted at the corner of the operations building. Its field of view covered the entire eastern walkway, a path that had historically been chosen by people who wanted to have conversations without witnesses, precisely because it had historically lacked camera coverage. It no longer lacked camera coverage. Hale did not know this. The installation had been classified as a routine OPSEC upgrade. The purchase order did not appear on any publicly accessible facilities record. She had made sure of that when she wrote the recommendation. She composed an email to Colonel Reinhold. Subject line: Precautionary notification. Body: Sir, if I am physically assaulted this evening, evidence will be available on thermal camera 4, Operations Building, East Corner. I am documenting this communication as a precautionary measure. Respectfully, CW03, Quinn. She scheduled it to send automatically at 1900 hours, unless she manually canceled it before then. She had 2 hours. She used them the way she used all available time before an operation with an uncertain outcome. Not by preparing physically. She was as ready physically as she was going to be, but by pressure testing the architecture of everything she had built, running through scenarios, identifying failure points, closing them. At 18:20, she left the signals facility and took her normal route toward her quarters, the route that passed behind the operations building. Her pace was steady. Her hands were at her sides. Her left arm was in the sling. Her breathing was even. Anyone watching her from a distance would have seen a small woman in camouflage pants walking to her quarters at the end of a shift. What was happening inside her mind had nothing to do with that image. She was running calculations with the same focused efficiency she brought to decoding hostile communications. Distance to probable contact point. Lighting conditions. Her own physical state. Left arm compromised, right arm fully functional, balance slightly adjusted to compensate for the sling's weight distribution. 3 probable targets, if the text meant what it appeared to mean. Known capability level based on observed behavior and standard military combatives training. Her own capability level, which she did not think about in abstract terms, but in the specific language of the disciplines Kessler had put into her bones over 2 years in a Virginia compound that appeared on no official training roster. Physics over strength. Redirection over resistance. Minimum force, maximum documentation. She heard them before she saw them. 3 sets of boots. The specific sound of people who have positioned themselves in advance and are waiting for someone to walk to them. She rounded the corner of the operations building, and they were there. Hale in the center, Voss on his left, Crane on his right. The same triangle she had cataloged in the dining facility, now without the audience they thought had been protecting their target. No audience. That was what they believed. The thermal camera's indicator light blinked once in the corner of her peripheral vision. She clocked it without moving her eyes toward it. "Chief," Hale said. His voice was quiet in the specific way that voices go quiet when a person believes they have finally arrived in a place where volume is no longer necessary. "I think it's time we finish that discussion about compliance." Zara stopped. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at him with the expression she had worn since the moment he pointed at her on the training field 4 days ago. Not afraid, not defiant, analytical. "Major," she said, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your current course of action." He reached out and grabbed her injured arm. He grabbed it hard, yanking her forward, using the sling as a lever the way someone uses a tool they think they understand. The pain arrived in a white vertical wave from elbow to shoulder, the partially healed ligaments screaming along every nerve pathway she had been managing for 4 days. She processed it as data. What happened next lasted 7 seconds and required no conscious decision, because the decisions had been made years ago in a compound in Virginia, and were stored now not in her mind, but in her body, available without the delay of thought. In the first second, she stepped into the pull instead of against it, collapsing the distance faster than Hale expected. Her right hand came up with 2 fingers, finding the mandibular pressure point below his jaw. Firm pressure on the nerve cluster that ran close to the surface there. His grip loosened involuntarily as his nervous system processed the competing input. In the second, she rotated her body using her core, guiding his forward momentum past her, and Hale stumbled 3 steps before catching himself on the building wall. In the third second, Voss charged from her left, throwing a wide swing that telegraphed itself from his shoulder drop and his weight shift. She raised her right forearm vertically, deflected at 90 degrees, let his momentum carry him past, her hand wrapping his wrist in a rotation that used his own weight to put him into the pavement. In the fourth second, Crane came low from her right, a tackle attempt, head down, arms reaching. She stepped back once. He hit empty air. The pavement met him at full speed. In the 5th second, Hale had recovered and threw everything he had left, an angry, wide swing with his full body weight behind it. She ducked 6 inches. It passed over her. She was already rising, her right hand on his tricep, her body driving from her legs through her core. And Hale went face first into the concrete, with a sound that echoed off the operations building wall. In the 6th second, she redirected Voss's second attempt, with a wrist rotation that put him back down without a strike. In the 7th second, she placed her boot gently on Crane's shoulder, enough to communicate one thing clearly. He did not move. She held the position for 5 seconds, looking directly at the corner of the operations building, where the thermal camera's indicator light blinked in the dark. She held eye contact with the lens, long enough that the image was unambiguous. Long enough that anyone reviewing the footage would understand that she knew exactly where the camera was, and had wanted the documentation to be complete. Then she stepped back. She adjusted the sling on her left arm. She continued walking toward her quarters at the same pace she had maintained since leaving the signals facility. She did not look back. 3 men lay behind her on the pavement, in the specific silence of people whose understanding of a situation has been completely and permanently corrected. She reached her quarters at 18:51. She sat at her desk and canceled the scheduled email. She opened a new message to Colonel Reinhold and wrote 3 sentences describing the assault, the defensive response, and the camera location. She attached the complete case file, 43 pages, every document she had compiled since the first day, every video file, every medical record, every statement from the 4 women at 4 bases. She hit send at 18:53. At 1900, Okafor was in Reinhold's office watching the thermal footage for the first time. The infrared image was clear despite the darkness. 3 large heat signatures and 1 smaller one. Hale initiating contact, grabbing the smaller figure's arm. The sequence that followed. The 3 large signatures on the ground. The smaller one walking away without breaking stride. Reinhold watched it twice without speaking. Then he said, quietly, "She set this up." It was not an accusation. It was recognition. "Yes, sir," Okafor said. "She knew about the camera." "She installed the camera, sir, 3 weeks ago. She classified the purchase order as routine OPSEC before any of this happened." Reinhold was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the freeze-framed final image. Zara Quinn's face, looking directly into the lens, with a composed certainty of someone who made a series of precise decisions and executed them without error. "Who is she, Okafor?" Reinhold said. "Who is she, really?" Okafor looked at the screen. He thought about the 30% of her file he had been able to access. The bronze star at 20 years old, citation classified. The language qualifications, the ISA notation. The single line in her last evaluation that read, "Operates at a level consistent with Tier 1 support personnel." He thought about the other thing he had learned, the thing he had not told her yet, the thing that made everything that had happened in the past 4 days considerably larger than an assault case. "Sir," he said, "about 70% of her file is classified above our current clearance level. What I can tell you is that the bronze star she received at 20 years old was for saving 23 lives in a single shift. Alone. At a terminal. In the dark." Reinhold looked at him. "And the man who put her arm in a sling has no idea," Okafor said. "No idea of what specifically?" Okafor turned to face Reinhold directly. "Sir, Major Hale's nephew, Lieutenant Junior Grade Patrick Hale, is assigned to SEAL Team 7. He deployed to the Pacific last spring on Operation Quiet Sequence." He paused. That operation came within 12 hours of a catastrophic compromise from a North Korean cyber intrusion targeting their deployment schedule. 23 operators would have walked into a kill zone that had been sold to the wrong people. Another pause. Someone stopped that from happening. 19 hours alone at a terminal. Broke AES 256 encryption. Provided coordinates accurate to 3 meters. Made the call. He looked at the frozen image on the screen. That was Chief Quinn. The room was very quiet. "Patrick Hale is alive," Okafor said, "because the woman his uncle tried to break in front of 300 people spent 19 hours saving his life. And Hale has never heard her name." Reinhold stood at his window for a long time. Then he turned around. "Get me Captain Fitzgerald. I want formal charges filed by 0800. All 3 of them confined to quarters tonight." He looked at Okafor steadily. "And I want Quinn's complete accessible file on my desk before that hearing is scheduled. I want to understand exactly who I'm dealing with before I stand in that room." Okafor nodded and moved toward the door. "One more thing," Reinhold said. Okafor stopped. "Is there anyone you need to call? Anyone who should know what's about to happen before it becomes official?" Okafor thought about a number in Virginia. A retired master chief who answered his phone at any hour and who had, over 2 years in a compound that did not officially exist, built the specific architecture of discipline and precision and minimum force that had just been deployed in perfect working order behind the operations building. "Yes, sir," he said. "There is." By 0600 the following morning, the story had already moved through every barracks on base. Not the official version. The official version did not exist yet. What moved through the barracks was the version carried by the 2 sailors who had been exiting the operations building at 1847 and had seen the last 4 seconds of what happened behind it. They had seen 3 officers on the ground and 1 small woman walking away without looking back. And they had told their petty officer, who told his chief, who told the duty officer, and by 2200 the story had acquired details that neither sailor had witnessed, but that the base population had collectively decided were true because they felt true. By 0600, Zara knew the story was circulating. She knew because 3 people she had never spoken to acknowledged her when she walked to the signals facility. Not with words, with a specific nod of people communicating something they did not have authorized language for. She logged it. Returned to her work. There was a Russian signals network operating near the Baltic coast that had been shifting its frequency pattern in ways she had been tracking for 6 days, and the tracking required attention that the previous 48 hours had not permitted her to give it. She gave it now. At 0800, Fitzgerald filed the formal charges. At 0815, Hale, Voss, and Crane were officially confined to quarters, pending investigation. At 0900, word reached Hale's network. His network was real and it was substantial. 20 years of service produced a web of obligation and alliance that extended from Camp Pendleton to the Pentagon. And the men inside that web began making calls within the hour. The calls carried a consistent message. Quinn was a troublemaker. Quinn had specialized training that made her response disproportionate to any reasonable provocation. Quinn was trying to destroy a decorated combat officer over a training matter. Quinn represented exactly the kind of institutional problem that good people needed to get ahead of before it became unmanageable. The calls landed on Reinhold's desk as quiet suggestions from people who outranked him by 1 or 2 grades. The suggestions were politely framed. They were nevertheless suggestions, and Reinhold had been in the Navy long enough to understand that politely framed suggestions from people who outranked him were a form of pressure with teeth in it. He read each one. He set each one aside. He did not respond to any of them. Instead, he called Fitzgerald into his office and told him he wanted the Article 32 hearing scheduled within 10 days. Fitzgerald looked at him. "Sir, that's considerably faster than standard proceedings." "I'm aware of that, Captain. Hale's network is going to interpret the speed as prejudgment." "Hale's network," Reinhold said, "is welcome to interpret whatever it likes. Schedule the hearing." Meanwhile, Zara was doing what she had been doing since the morning after the training field incident. Building. Adding to the foundation with the same methodical patience she brought to mapping hostile signals architecture. Each piece placed with precision, each connection verified before the next one was established. She had sent follow-up messages to all 4 women, explaining the hearing timeline and what their testimony would require. All 4 had confirmed. She had compiled their statements into formal affidavits formatted to military legal standards. She had cross-referenced each incident with Hale's assignment history and created a timeline that showed, without the possibility of legitimate dispute, that his pattern of behavior had followed him from base to base for 8 years without consequence. On the 7th day, she received something she had not been looking for. A certified package arrived at the JAG office addressed to Captain Fitzgerald, copied to Zara Quinn, from a retired Rear Admiral named James Foley. She did not know this name. She looked it up in 30 seconds. Rear Admiral James Foley, retired, whose daughter was Specialist Brianne Foley, the 4th woman, the one whose complaint had simply disappeared during an administrative transition. The package contained a 2016 naval investigation file. Zara read it at her terminal, with the same expression she brought to all data. But this data made something shift behind her eyes, in a way that data very rarely made things shift. In 2016, when Hale was a lieutenant, he had dislocated a female petty officer's shoulder during a combatives demonstration at Naval Station Norfolk. The petty officer had filed a complaint. An investigation had been opened. The investigation had found credible evidence of assault and had recommended court-martial proceedings. The case had been closed 6 days later. The closure notation read 2 words: command discretion. The investigating officer's supplementary notes, included in the package because Rear Admiral Foley had retained copies through channels that his rank and connections had made available to him, showed that the closure had been directed by Hale's commanding officer, who had communicated in writing that Hale was, and the exact language was in the file, too valuable an asset to the training pipeline to lose over what amounted to a misunderstanding between a junior sailor and an overzealous instructor. 6 days, 8 years ago. The institution had known since the beginning. Zara sat with that for approximately 30 seconds. Then she forwarded the package to Fitzgerald with a single line attached. Please note, this represents the earliest documented incident and establishes institutional awareness preceding all subsequent complaints. She saved the updated file. 59 pages now. She did not send it yet. There was one more thing coming, and she could feel it, the way she felt signal anomalies before they fully resolved. A change in the background noise that the front of her mind had not yet named, but that the trained part of her had already catalogued. The thing that was coming arrived at 2100 that evening, in the form of Master Chief Okafor, knocking on the frame of the signals facility door. She looked up from her terminal. He walked in and sat in the chair across from her desk, with the deliberateness of someone who has decided that the conversation he is about to have has been delayed long enough. I owe you something, he said. She waited. I pulled your file when this started, the 30% that's accessible. I saw the Bronze Star. I saw the ISA notation. I saw the evaluation that said Tier 1 support level. He put his hands flat on the desk in front of him. And then I ran the dates, cross-referenced them against my own contacts. Operation Quiet Sequence, Pacific Theater, last spring. SEAL Team 7, 23 operators. Zara's hands were still on the keyboard. "I know what you did," Okafor said. 19 hours. Alone. AES 256 that should not have been breakable. The coordinates you called in with 3-meter accuracy. The Hellfire authorization. He paused. The team went through clean, and they never knew why. She said nothing. "I also know something you don't know yet," he said. "Something I should have told you sooner, and didn't, because I was trying to decide whether it was relevant." He met her eyes directly. Lieutenant Junior Grade Patrick Hale was on that team. He is Conrad Hale's nephew. His only nephew. The boy was 24 years old. He is alive because you spent 19 hours in the dark saving people whose names you didn't know. The signals facility hummed around them. Zara processed what Okafor had just said with the same methodology she processed everything else. She ran it through the architecture of what she understood. She located it in the sequence of events. She identified what it changed and what it did not change. What it did not change: the case file, the evidence, the 4 women, the 2016 investigation, all of it continued to mean exactly what it had meant before. What it changed: everything about the hearing that was coming. Because when the panel understood that the man they were adjudicating had tried to break the arm of the woman who saved his nephew's life, they would not be processing an assault case. They would be processing a story. And stories had a weight that evidence alone sometimes could not carry. "Does he know?" she said. "Hale, does he know who I am?" "No," Okafor said. "He has no idea you exist. You weren't in any briefing he had access to. Your name doesn't appear in anything at his clearance level." She nodded once. "I need you to present that at the hearing," she said. "Not as emotional context, as documented fact. If Patrick Hale's deployment records and my Bronze Star citation can be cleared for introduction into the proceeding at the appropriate level, the panel needs to have that information. Not because it changes what Hale did, because it completes the picture of what this institution has been protecting." Okafor looked at her for a moment. "You're not angry," he said. "It was an observation, not a question." "I'm very angry," Zara said, with the same level voice she had used for everything. "I've been very angry since the moment he put his hands on Petty Officer Marsh in 2021, and the system told her she was overreacting." She paused. "Anger is information. I'm using it." Okafor stood. He had one more thing to say, and he had been deciding since he walked in how to say it. "Victor Kessler is coming," he said. "I called him after the operations building incident. He's driving from Virginia. He'll be here before the hearing." The name produced the first visible reaction she had shown to anything Okafor had said in the past 15 minutes. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. The specific quality of a person learning that something they did not know they needed is on its way. "He doesn't have to come," she said. "He said to tell you that the weapon that looks like a person is the most dangerous weapon." Okafor moved toward the door. "He also said you'd tell me he doesn't have to come. He said he's coming anyway." After Okafor left, Zara sat at her terminal and did not type anything for approximately 4 minutes, which was, for her, a very long time to do nothing. She thought about 19 hours in a signals facility in the Pacific. She thought about a name she had never known. Lieutenant Junior Grade Patrick Hale, who had walked through a valley that was supposed to kill him, and had gone home, and was now, presumably, living his life without any knowledge of the specific 19 hours that made that life possible. She thought about Petty Officer Marsh in Japan, still carrying the weight of being told she was overreacting. She thought about Ensign Reeves, who had walked away from 9 years of service. She thought about all the institutional machinery that had protected one man across 8 years and 6 women, because protecting him was easier than confronting him. She opened the case file. 59 pages. She read through it from the beginning, not because she needed to, she had memorized it, but because reading it reminded her what she was doing this for, and why the precision of every single page mattered. When she finished, she added a final section. Incident Pattern Summary. Industrial Knowledge, established 2016 via CID investigation. Case closed. Command discretion. Pattern continued uninterrupted through 2024, across 6 documented victims at 5 installations. Systemic failure at every intervention point. She cited each one with its date and the name of the person responsible for the closure. She saved the file. 61 pages. She sent it to Fitzgerald at exactly 2200 hours with 1 line attached. "Sir, this is the complete package. Everything the panel will need." She canceled out of her terminal, stood, stretched her right arm, checked the sling on her left, and walked to the door of the signals facility. Outside, the base was settling into its nighttime rhythms. Distant voices, a formation somewhere running a late PT. The specific sounds of an institution that had been making decisions about people like her, and about women like Marsh and Reeves and Foley for years, mostly in the direction of convenience, mostly in the direction of least resistance. In 10 days, that institution was going to sit in a room and be asked to look at 61 pages of what its convenience had cost. Zara walked back to her quarters through the cool California dark and thought about Victor Kessler driving from Virginia, and about Okafor saying the weapon that looks like a person is the most dangerous weapon, and about the 4 women whose responses were still saved in her encrypted messages, and about a lieutenant junior grade named Patrick Hale, who was alive and did not know why. She was ready for the hearing. She had been ready since the day she walked to the center of the horseshoe formation and looked at Conrad Hale for the first time, and understood exactly what kind of man she was dealing with, and exactly what kind of patience the situation was going to require. The patience was over. Victor Kessler arrived at Camp Pendleton on the 9th day, 2 days before the hearing. He drove himself from Virginia in a civilian truck that had 140,000 miles on it, and looked exactly like what it was. A vehicle belonging to a man who had spent 30 years going places that did not appear on maps, and had never developed an interest in appearances. He was 63 years old, with gray hair cut close, and the specific quality of stillness that accumulates in people who have spent decades making difficult decisions in conditions that punished hesitation. He found Zara in the signals facility at 1400 hours. He knocked on the doorframe the way Okafor had knocked, the way people knock when they are asking permission rather than announcing themselves. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She had not seen him in 4 years, not since she graduated from the ISA course and moved to her first operational assignment. And 4 years of the kind of work she had been doing produced changes in a person that were not visible in photographs, but were immediately visible in person, in the way someone occupied space, in the quality of their attention. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who recognizes his own work. "Chief Hale," he said, and then corrected himself immediately, with the ease of someone who had been briefed. "Chief Quinn." "CSM Kessler," she said. "You didn't have to come." "I know." He sat down in the chair across from her desk, with the unhurried comfort of someone who had been in more difficult rooms than this one. "Raymond told me what happened. Both incidents. I watched the footage." He paused. "You executed it exactly right. Every principle, every sequence. Minimum force, maximum documentation. legal defensibility at every point. He held her gaze. I'm not here because you needed my help. I'm here because I wanted you to hear that directly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The hearing is in 2 days." "I know. I'm testifying." He put his hands flat on his knees. "As your primary defensive tactics instructor, and as a witness to the curriculum you were trained under, I'll establish for the panel that what you did behind that operations building was not aggression. It was the precise, documented, legally defensible application of training designed specifically for situations where force becomes unavoidable after all other options have been exhausted." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Are you prepared for them to try to make you into the aggressor? Because that is what Hale's network has been building toward for 9 days. They're going to argue that your training makes your response disproportionate, that you're dangerous, that a woman with your capability engaging 3 officers constitutes an offensive action regardless of who initiated contact." "I know," Zara said. And I have 61 pages of documentation, 2 video files with verified chain of custody, a medical report, 6 sworn affidavits from previous victims, a 2016 CID investigation showing institutional knowledge, and a thermal imaging record showing exactly who grabbed whose arm first. She said it without heat, the way a person recites a list of tools they have confirmed are functional before beginning a task. They can build whatever narrative they want. The evidence doesn't change based on the narrative. Kessler looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that he had not planned to say. Something that came from a place in him that the professional surface usually kept covered. "I taught a lot of people over 30 years, he said. "Most of them were good soldiers. Some of them were exceptional. You were the only one I ever taught who I thought understood from the very beginning the difference between having a capability and knowing when not to use it." He paused. What Garrison did on that training field, what he did in that dining facility, what he did behind that building, he did it because he thought your stillness was absence. He thought your quiet meant you had nothing. He shook his head slowly. The most dangerous people I have ever known were quiet. Zara did not respond immediately. She looked at the screen in front of her for a moment, and then back at Kessler. "The 4 women," she said. "Marsh and Reeves and Obie and Foley. And Bridwell from 2016, the one from the Admiral's package." She paused. "They were quiet, too. They did everything right. They filed the complaints. They submitted the paperwork. They trusted the process." Her voice remained level, but something in it had weight. "And the institution told them they were overreacting, and then transferred them, and then forgot them." She met Kessler's eyes. "My documentation doesn't change that. My training doesn't change that. The only thing that changes that is making sure the panel cannot look away from what those 5 files mean." Kessler nodded once. "Then that is what we make sure of." He left an hour later. The next 2 days moved with the specific quality of time before a scheduled reckoning. The waiting that is not empty, but full, charged with the accumulated weight of everything that has been built toward a single moment. The hearing convened at 900 on the 11th day. The conference room in the headquarters building held 40 people at capacity. It held 53 today. 3-officer panel. Reinhold presiding. Lieutenant Commander Yates as legal advisor. A commander from a separate command providing outside review. Fitzgerald as prosecutor. Hale alone at the defense table, which communicated something about either his confidence or his judgment. And those were not always different things. On the video screen behind the panel table, 5 windows opened, one by one. Marsh from Japan. the circles under her eyes visible even through the compressed video feed. The expression of someone who had been carrying something for 3 years and was still deciding whether to believe this room was real. Reeves, from her civilian apartment in Virginia, sitting at a kitchen table with her hands folded, dressed in civilian clothes that she somehow wore with a residual bearing of 9 years of naval service. Obie, from Fort Campbell, with her jaw set in the specific way of someone who has stopped asking for permission to be angry. Foley, from San Diego, with her father's name in the room before she said a single word. And Bridwell, from 2016, 8 years of waiting, visible in the stillness she brought to her portion of the screen. Hale saw the 5 windows open. He looked at each face. Something moved across his expression that his controlled surface caught and suppressed, but not quickly enough. Reinhold saw it. Fitzgerald saw it. Zara, seated in the front row beside Okafor, saw it with the precision of someone who had been reading rooms since before she was old enough to explain what reading a room meant. Fitzgerald presented the evidence in chronological order. He was methodical, and he was fast. He played the training field video without narration, letting the footage carry what narration would have weakened. He played it twice. He presented Dr. Trent's medical documentation, reading 2 specific sentences aloud. In 11 years of treating training injuries, I have never seen a demonstration produce this category of damage. This is not consistent with any training parameter I am aware of. He displayed the timeline of 6 incidents across 5 bases across 8 years. He put the 2016 CID file on screen, with the closure notation enlarged. 2 words: command discretion. The room was very quiet by the time he finished the timeline. Then he called the women. Marsh testified first. She had been scared when she sent her initial message to Zara. She was not scared now. She was something beyond scared, a specific state that people reach when they have decided that the cost of silence has finally exceeded the cost of speaking, and there is nothing left to lose by being completely clear. She described the wrist, the snap, the complaint, the investigation. The word emotional appearing in the official finding. The transfer to Japan that had been presented as her choice and had been nothing of the kind. When she finished, the room was quieter than it had been before she started. Reeves followed. She spoke about walking away from 9 years of service with the specific voice of someone describing a wound they have been treating alone for a long time. She said, and the room absorbed this, that she had left not because of what Hale did to her, but because of what the institution did with her report. That the injury to her head had healed. The injury to her faith in the uniform she had worn for 9 years had not. Obie did not cry. She described the chokehold and the blackout with the factual precision of a soldier filing an after-action report. And then she said one thing that was not in any document. She said that after the complaint was closed, she had spent 6 months wondering what she had done wrong. She said she now understood she had done nothing wrong. She said that understanding had taken 3 years to reach her, and she wanted the panel to know what those 3 years had cost. Foley was briefest. She said her complaint had disappeared because someone made it disappear, and she had accepted that because she was 20 years old and did not yet understand that acceptance was a choice with consequences. She said she understood that now. Bridwell, the first, the 2016 case, the one who had waited longest, spoke last. She was a federal public defender now. She brought the language of someone who had spent 8 years learning exactly how to say the hardest things in rooms designed to resist them. She said the institution had known since 2016. She said the institution had chosen, at every available decision point across 8 years, to protect its asset over its people. She said this was not a case about one man. This was a case about every signature on every closure document. Every person who had written command discretion and moved on. The panel did not visibly react. Panels were trained not to visibly react. But Reinholdt's jaw had the specific set of a man who has been holding himself very still for a long time, and is doing so now with considerable effort. Hale's defense lasted 40 minutes. It came down to 3 arguments, delivered with decreasing conviction, as each one failed to land against the weight of what preceded it. Quinn was insubordinate. Quinn's training made her dangerous. Quinn had manufactured the confrontations to build a case. He delivered these arguments in the voice of a man who had spent 20 years in rooms that rearranged themselves around him, and was only now, in this room, beginning to understand that this room was not rearranging. Fitzgerald objected to 2 factual mischaracterizations. Reinholdt sustained both without deliberation. Then Hale said something that he did not plan to say. He said it because he was running out of architecture, and the thing underneath was showing. He said that Quinn represented the problem with the modern military, that her type of service, invisible, technical, unverifiable, had been given equal weight to the kind of service that involved real sacrifice, real risk, real presence in the field. The room went extremely quiet. Okafor looked at Zara. She looked at the table in front of her. Her expression did not change. Fitzgerald stood slowly. "Colonel Reinholdt," he said, "with the panel's permission, I'd like to introduce the final exhibit." Reinholdt nodded. "I am requesting a partial declassification waiver that was approved by Naval Intelligence Command at 0600 this morning. The exhibit covers a single classified operation. Operation Quiet Sequence, Pacific Theater, last spring. I am presenting the relevant elements only." He put the documents on screen, not the full file, 3 pages. The operational summary, the intelligence breach notification, the after-action notation showing the breach was neutralized 19 hours before the team deployed. He had removed the names of the SEAL operators per the declassification conditions. He had not removed one name. He had specifically requested that one name remain. Chief Warrant Officer 3, Zara Quinn. He read 4 sentences from the summary. Analyst Quinn, working alone for 19 consecutive hours, identified and neutralized a North Korean cyber intrusion targeting the real-time deployment schedule of a forward SEAL team. Her actions prevented the compromise of 23 naval special warfare personnel who would have deployed into a prepared kill zone. She decoded AES 256 encryption using a pattern-based attack of her own design and provided coordinates accurate to 3 meters. Her Bronze Star citation, classified at a level above this proceeding, reflects the nature and consequence of this singular action. He set the document down. Lieutenant Junior Grade Patrick Hale was one of those 23 operators. He said it once, quietly. Then he sat down. Hale's face did something that his 20 years of controlled command presence could not contain. The color left it, then came back. His hands on the defense table went flat, and then pressed down hard as if he needed something solid. He looked at Zara. She did not look at him. She was looking at the panel. She was looking at Reinholdt's face, which had the expression of a man completing a calculation that had been running since the first day of this proceeding, and had just reached its final term. Hale opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. "I didn't know," he said. His voice had lost everything that had been in it for the past 40 minutes. What was left was something much smaller. "I never knew." Nobody responded. Nobody was required to respond. Reinhold looked at Hale for a long moment. Then he looked at the panel to his left and right. He looked at the 5 women on the video screen. He looked at Zara Quinn sitting in the front row with her left arm in a sling and her spine exactly straight, and her face the same composed, unreadable surface it had been since the moment Hale pointed a thick finger at her on the training field 11 days ago. He looked back at his notes. "The panel will deliberate," he said. "We will recess for 30 minutes." He stood. The room stood. And in the specific silence of 53 people, all absorbing the same thing at the same time, the panel filed out, and Hale sat alone at the defense table, staring at a document that had just shown him the precise dimensions of what he had done, without knowing he was doing it. On the video screen, Bridwell was crying. Not loudly. Silently. With the specific relief of someone who has been holding something for 8 years and has just been allowed to put it down. Okafor leaned slightly toward Zara. He said nothing. He did not need to. She nodded once, very slightly, in the specific acknowledgement of 2 people who have been working toward something together and have just watched it arrive. The panel was back in 28 minutes. Reinhold read the findings without preamble. His voice had the specific quality of a man who understood that what he was about to say would be repeated, documented, and used as a reference point in proceedings long after this room no longer existed. He spoke with a deliberate weight of someone who had decided, sometime in the 28 minutes the panel had been deliberating, that clarity mattered more than ceremony. Guilty on all specifications. Article 93, cruelty and maltreatment of a subordinate. Article 128, assault, 2 specifications, Training Area 3 and Operations Building East Walkway. Article 92, retaliation against a service member for filing a protected report. Article 133, conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. He read the sentence. Formal reprimand entered into permanent record. Removal from promotion list effective immediately. Removal from command track consideration. Reduction in grade to lieutenant pending approval of convening authority. Forfeiture of half pay for 12 months. Administrative separation proceedings to be initiated within 30 days. Hale sat at the defense table without moving. His face had the hollowed quality of a man watching a structure he believed was permanent reveal that it was never structural at all. Voss and Crane received letters of reprimand, mandatory reassignment, and leadership remediation requirements that would follow their records for the remainder of their careers. Reinhold set down his papers. He looked at the defense table for a moment and then deliberately looked away from it. He looked at Zara. "Chief Quinn," he said, "the panel wants to note for the record that what you did in building this case represents a standard of professional precision that this institution should require of itself and frequently fails to meet. You documented everything. You exhausted every available non-physical option. You acted with minimum necessary force only when physical action became unavoidable, and you ensured that action was fully documented before you took it." He paused. "What you did here is not what someone does who is looking for a fight. It is what someone does who is committed to a standard of accountability that this institution has a responsibility to honor." Another pause. Longer. "The institution failed 5 women before you reached this room. You did not allow it to fail a 6th. Zara said, "Petty Officer Marsh, Ensign Reeves, Staff Sergeant Obi, Specialist Foley, and Lieutenant Commander Bridwell did not fail, sir. The institution failed them. There is a difference." Reinhold looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said, "there is. And I want that distinction in the record." He turned to his aide. "Make sure it is." He closed the hearing. The room did not erupt. It exhaled. The specific collective breath of people who have been holding something for a long time and are now allowed to release it. On the video screen, Bridwell had both hands over her mouth. Obi was looking at the ceiling the way people look at the ceiling when they are refusing to cry in a room full of people and succeeding only partly. Marsh was shaking her head slowly, not in disagreement, but in the specific motion of someone absorbing something they had stopped believing they would live to receive. Reeves sat completely still, with her eyes closed and her hands folded on the kitchen table in front of her. And the stillness on her face was the most complicated thing in the room. Foley said one word into her microphone before the connection closed. "Thank you." She said it to no one specifically, and to everyone simultaneously. The 5 windows went dark. Zara sat in the front row and did not move for a moment. Okafor was beside her, and he did not speak, which was the right thing to do, because there was nothing that words could add to what had just happened that silence could not carry more accurately. Then Hale's voice reached her from across the room. "Chief Quinn." She turned. He was standing at the defense table. His attorneys had closed their files and were preparing to leave, and he had stopped them with a look, and waited until the room had emptied enough that what he was about to say would be heard by fewer people. He looked like a man who had been deflated not by the verdict, but by the 4 sentences Fitzgerald had read from the Operation Quiet Sequence summary, the ones that had shown him exactly what he had done and to whom. "I need to say something," he said. She waited. "I read the summary the panel was given. The 3 pages. He stopped and started again. "Patrick is my sister's only child. He is the only family I have left after she died." His voice was level, but it was costing him something to keep it that way. "I have been to every deployment send-off, every homecoming. When he came home from the Pacific last spring, I was at the pier. He looked fine. He was fine." He met her eyes. "I didn't know. I want you to understand that I genuinely did not know." Zara looked at him for a moment. "I know you didn't know," she said. "That is not why it matters." "Then why does it matter?" "Because Petty Officer Marsh didn't know she was serving alongside someone who would do to her what you did. Because Ensign Reeves didn't know. Because none of them knew, and not knowing didn't protect them." She kept her voice at the same level it had held for 11 days. "You didn't assault me because you knew who I was. You assaulted me because you believed I was someone who could be touched without consequence. That belief existed before you pointed at me on that training field. It has been operating for 8 years. That is what matters." Hale absorbed this with the expression of someone receiving something they have no adequate response to. "Your apology to me is not the apology that is required," Zara continued. "The women who are owed apologies are the 5 who testified today, and the ones who didn't testify because they thought no room like this would ever exist. If you mean what you are trying to say right now, write to each of them. Not an explanation, not context. A direct acknowledgement of what you did specifically to each of them, without any language that moves responsibility from you to the situation." She paused. "And then, go be better somewhere else." Hale looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, slowly, and walked out. She watched him go. She did not feel triumph. She felt the specific thing that settles into a person when a task has been completed correctly. Not the excitement of winning, but the quieter satisfaction of having held a standard under conditions designed to erode it. Kessler was waiting in the corridor outside the conference room. He fell into step beside her without announcement. "You heard," she said. "I heard." They walked for a moment without speaking. "He tried to tell me he didn't know about Patrick," Zara said. "I know." "I told him that wasn't the point." "I know that too." Kessler was quiet for a few steps. "Is it the point? For you? Does knowing change anything about what you built and why you built it?" She considered this with the same honesty she brought to all difficult questions. "No," she said. "The case was never about what he didn't know about me. It was about what he knew about himself, and did anyway. That has nothing to do with Patrick Hale." She paused. "But I would be dishonest if I said it didn't add a dimension. That a man who tried to break the arm of the woman who saved his nephew's life did it in front of 300 witnesses and believed there would be no record." She looked at Kessler. The institution made him believe that. 8 years of protected behavior built him into someone who could stand in a training field and do what he did with confidence. That is the thing the hearing was actually about. Kessler nodded. "You're going to be good at this for a long time," he said. "And it's going to cost you in ways you can't fully predict. The people whose comfort you ended today have long memories and significant reach." He looked at her. "Are you ready for that?" "I've been operating in environments where comfort was not a variable for 4 years," she said. "I can manage people with long memories." He almost smiled. It was the specific expression of a teacher watching a student prove that the teaching is no longer required. He left that afternoon. He shook her hand at the gate with the grip of someone communicating finality and continuation simultaneously. Something that was not quite over and not quite beginning, but existed in the space between the two. "The weapon that looks like a person," he said, "is the most dangerous weapon," she said. "I know." "No." He held her gaze. "I've been saying that for 30 years because it was useful. But I want to correct it for you specifically." He paused. "A weapon exists to be used. You didn't use yourself these past 11 days. You used everything around you. The system, the evidence, the law, the documentation. You made the institution do what it was built to do and refused to do." He released her hand. "That is not what a weapon does. That is what a guardian does." He got in his truck and drove away. 3 days after the hearing, the Navy announced a service-wide review of demonstration training protocols. Independent observers at all combatives instruction events. Mandatory video documentation. Immediate medical screening following any training contact that produced injury. The policy brief that circulated to base commanders did not mention Zara Quinn by name. The policy itself, the specific structure of accountability it created, was already being called by a name among the senior NCO community at Camp Pendleton. Quietly, informally, in the way that names attach themselves to things, when the people closest to them understand where the thing came from. The Hale Standard. Her name would never appear in the public version. She was aware of this and indifferent to it in the specific way of someone who understood that the work mattering was not the same as the worker being visible. Responses from the 5 women arrived across 4 days. Marsh wrote that she had submitted a request to return stateside and was thinking seriously about re-enlisting. She said the word seriously twice, as if she needed to convince herself it was a word that applied to the idea. She said she had not thought seriously about re-enlisting in 2 years. Reeves said she was in contact with a military legal organization that handled wrongful separation cases, and that she was cautiously optimistic about having her record corrected. She said cautiously, the way people say words when the last time they were not cautious, they got hurt. Obi said she had told her family what happened for the first time. All of it. She said telling them felt like putting down a bag she had been carrying for 18 months without admitting it was heavy. She thanked Zara and then apologized for the thanks, saying she knew Zara would say the thanks was not necessary. She said she was going to say it anyway. Foley said, "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, for as long as you need it." Bridwell said 4 words. She said them in a message that contained nothing else. Justice delayed, not denied. Zara read each message the same way she read all data. Completely, carefully, without rushing past the parts that were difficult to hold. She did not respond immediately to any of them because she wanted to respond to each one with the specific accuracy the person deserved, rather than the general accuracy that came from responding quickly. She was still at her terminal when Okafor knocked on the doorframe for the third time in 11 days. He put something on the edge of her monitor without ceremony. A coin. Heavy bronze, the Naval Special Warfare Anchor and Trident, the Master Chief's coin. The specific weight of 3 decades of service pressed into a small, flat circle. "This is for reminding us what a standard looks like," he said. She picked it up, held it, set it back down on the edge of the monitor where he had placed it. "Okafor," she said. "Chief. Patrick Hale, the LT. Does he know?" Okafor was quiet for a moment. He will when the declassified summary is released next month. It won't have full context, but his father will tell him. His father was at the pier when the team came home from the Pacific. He paused. "He'll know." She nodded. She turned back to her terminal. The Baltic Signals Network had produced a new anomaly while the hearing was running. A frequency shift that suggested a command node relocation she had been anticipating for 3 days. She pulled up the current data streams and began working through them with the focused attention of someone returning to a task they had never actually left. Outside the signals facility, the base was moving through its late afternoon rhythms. Formations finishing. Personnel heading to the dining facility. The specific sounds of an institution continuing to function, which was what institutions did regardless of what happened inside them. The machinery moving forward on its own momentum. Inside, Zara Quinn worked. She was 22 years old. She had, depending on how the next 2 decades went, between 15 and 25 years of this left. Years of signals and patterns and the particular invisible war that never made the news and never stopped running. She would spend most of those years in rooms like this one, doing work that would be classified above the access level of the people it protected, saving lives that would never know they were saved, holding standards that the institution would sometimes honor and sometimes ignore, and sometimes, when forced to confront itself by someone who refused to accept less than what it claimed to stand for, actually meet. She knew all of that. She had always known all of that. What she had learned in the past 11 days was something she had not fully understood before, that the invisible war she fought in this room was not separate from the visible world of formations and hearings and women who file complaints and were told they were overreacting. It was the same war. Different terrain, different tools, same fundamental question: whether the institution would protect the people who served it or protect itself from them. She had forced the answer this time. She would force it again if she had to. And she would build every case the same way she had built this one, methodically, completely, with 61 pages of evidence and 2 video files, and the specific patience of someone who understood that justice was not a feeling, but a structure that had to be constructed one documented brick at a time. The Baltic anomaly resolved into a clear pattern at 21:40 hours. Command node confirmed. New position plotted. She picked up the secure phone, provided coordinates, recommended surveillance parameters, logged the action, and closed the file. She opened the next priority item, a North Korean communications cluster showing unusual activity near the Taiwan Strait. She pulled the raw data and began sorting signal from noise with the practiced precision of someone who had been doing this long enough that the distinction announced itself before she consciously looked for it. The trident tattoo on her left shoulder blade was covered by her uniform shirt. The healing scar on her left forearm was visible below the sleeve. The coin Okafor had left sat on the edge of her monitor, and caught the light from the screen in a small, steady point. She did not look like what she was. That was the point. That had always been the point. The institution had sent a man to a training field who had seen a small woman in a white sports bra and camouflage pants with her hair down, and decided that what he was looking at was someone he could use to demonstrate a lesson about physical dominance to 300 people. He had been completely wrong. Not because she was stronger than she appeared, though she was. Not because she was more dangerous than she appeared, though she was. But because he had looked at her and seen the absence of visible power, and had confused that absence with the absence of power itself. The quietest person in the room is not waiting for permission. She is doing the work. And when the moment comes that requires her to stop doing it quietly and do it visibly instead, she does not need to announce herself, because 300 witnesses and 61 pages of documentation and 5 women finally given a room that was not designed to ignore them have already said everything that needs to be said. Zara Quinn turned back to her screens and went back to work. The mission had never stopped. It never would.